So my story is that my health issues were misdiagnosed for decades. And I always knew, this morning I'm thinking I'd like to write a letter to all these doctors and send them all a copy explaining what they all did to me. There's all these doctors in my past, a couple long-term doctors, psychiatrists, all these doctors that were involved in my care. And none of them know how they screwed up. None of them know what they did. So there's all these doctors that I no longer see, but there's all these reports. My whole medical record is all misdiagnosis, derogatory comments. See, when you finally put the pieces together, and that might take you 3 years or 40 years, when you finally put all the pieces together of what's actually happening, and when you start to get the right diagnosis, which has just been literally a battle for my life, when you start to get the right diagnosis, there's nothing cleaning up all the misdiagnosis and the derogatory comments in your medical records. See, and all those doctors that you saw that are still in your community and doctors that you see today can look at records from them, comments from them, misdiagnosing you, and nobody knows you're being misdiagnosed. They can read negative comments that all these other doctors that you used to see wrote about you years ago, but nobody's cleaning up the errors ever. So you remain buried in all this misdiagnosis. But you know what? There are doctors that I saw for years and just constant appointments, and they were misdiagnosing me. And, about 15 years ago, I finally realized, 10, 15 years ago, I finally realized there's got to be a part of the medical records that doctors can get into, that doctors can see, notes about you that they can see that they're communicating with each other. They're reading notes and derogatory comments about you written by each other that you can't see. I started to catch on, there's a way that they're negatively influencing each other. And when you mention that, they'll call you paranoid. They'll call you paranoid right to your face, that you think that they're out to get you. I knew 10, 15 years ago that there's either a portal or parts of your medical record or a notes section or whatever that they can access that you will never have access, that you can't access. And they're negatively influencing each other with their misdiagnosis and derogatory comments about you. And I mentioned that to my last longtime doctor, And yeah, he there was so much, you know, so much cognitive dissonance. And I can't tell you the satisfaction of finding out years later that I was right. Sitting there over and over again, face to face with this doctor. And I've known for decades that I was being misdiagnosed. And they will create a narrative about you that isn't true. But you can't beat down that narrative. There can be a narrative, a whole narrative being created about you over the course of time. They're building up this story about who you are with their comments, with their diagnoses, multiple diagnoses, anxiety, depression, this, that, the other thing. They're creating this story about you, literally. Long term, they're creating this story through time in your medical records of who you are and what's wrong with you. And you're being misdiagnosed for years. But you don't know that this narrative that's been created about you. You're fully unaware of how they're continuing to misdiagnose you and what's driving that. And it's all there in writing, but you're completely unaware of that. And you start to catch on that there's something going on. There's some way that they are negatively influencing each other. And I was right. I saw this video, I think I posted it on YouTube here, this seasoned Canadian nurse saying that, yeah, there's a part of your medical records that you won't see. And I've known that for 10, 15 years. Once I was sitting with a specialist a couple of years ago, a specialist that was misdiagnosing me. He was referring back, right in front of me, he was referring back to notes that were written about me 10 years ago by a specialist that was misdiagnosing me in his specialty. And I was blown away, because it's triangulation, right? They're negatively influencing. They're not, well, most of the time they're not doing it on purpose. If one of them is ticked off at you, yeah, they can harm you, and they can harm your future health care with, a deliberate comment that's going to harm things even further. Because I've seen that as well. Vindictive behavior, right? But for the most part, they're misdiagnosing you. They're not doing it on purpose, but they're negatively influencing you, influencing each other. And that is the fuel that keeps them misdiagnosing you with all these comments that you'll never see. So I've seen confirmation of that in the past couple of days of a seasoned nurse my age talking about this. It took me 40 years to figure it all out. 40 years of misdiagnosis and literally being tortured. And all these doctors are unaware of what they've done to me. But it's not like there's victory at the end, because they're all under the impression, still of all the misdiagnosis of they all think that they were right. No one ever goes back to them and says, do you actually understand what you did to me, what you took part in, how all of you collectively misdiagnosed me and literally tortured me? I was fighting for my life. And I knew I was being misdiagnosed, and I could not get through to you. You were so sure of what you were doing. And when I went for a second opinion, a third opinion, a fourth opinion, a fifth opinion, they get in those records, and now they're poisoned. They've been turned again. These doctors, these specialists, when you find a different family doctor and then another family doctor and another family doctor, if they go into your records before you even walk through the door, most of them have been completely poisoned by those notes and misdiagnosing comments and derogatory comments. Most of them have been poisoned by reading that before you've walked through the door. So you're screwed before you've even showed up for your appointment. If you're lucky and you find a free-thinking doctor who's smart enough not to be influenced by this dirty trail behind you, then you might have a chance. I never stood a chance. Because patients have no power. Patients are completely powerless. And they will, make up a narrative that you have no credibility, that you're walking around constantly complaining. But when you find out in the end that you're right and you start to get proper diagnosis, there's no way of cleaning up like a 40-year history of misdiagnosis and derogatory comments. And the problem is that it's all still there. Doctors can still go there and it's all there. They can still go there and be negatively influenced by everything that's there. When I was sitting with this, and this has happened many different times with different doctors, I was sitting there face to face with a specialist who was harming me by misdiagnosing me when I was in medical crisis. And he's looking at notes from 10 years ago from a colleague of his who was misdiagnosing me. And I was on all these drugs, struggling to breathe. I was on opioids, gabapentin, benzodiazepines, zopiclone, all these drugs, all these respiratory depressants, struggling to breathe. And they were talking to me like I was a child, like I was delusional. I was suffering from respiratory depression. Benzodiazepines, opioids, multiple sleeping pills, gabapentin are all contraindicated. That's a contraindication. That's like an overdose. And multiples of these pills, multiples of each pill added together. And they're reading these derogatory comments that I'm delusional. They were talking to me like I was a child. I was struggling to breathe from the drugs. I was struggling to breathe from the respiratory depression. That respiratory depression was never diagnosed. But the derogatory comments were there for this guy to be negatively influenced with or by.